Hello, freaks and geeks. Today we talk about a book series with mages, vampires, werewolves, and you know what? Urban fantasy has a lot to do with the culture it is associated with. You have the US, and urban fantasy is basically Harry Dresden in a cowboy hat, barging in and blowing shit up. But if you write urban fantasy in a country like Russia in the 90s, then you'll probably have a lot of bureaucracy and soul-crushing misery. So, today we'll talk about Russian urban fantasy and more specifically about the Watch series by Sergei Lukyanenko. Back in the early 2000s, I have read an amazing series that was all about supernaturals living in modern cities and stuff happening, and they were amazing. They merged the supernatural with the hard-boiled crime. It was sort of like Nancy Collins in her splatterpunk novel Sunglass After Dark met Raymond Chandler and Dashiell Hammett and this kind of stuff. And there was this badass protagonist in these books, and of course I'm talking about Anita Blake Vampire Hunter by Laura Gay Hamilton. Yeah, I know. And I used to love the first two books, and then I went on the internet, which existed back then, and I read about the books that were coming out at that time, and I was like, oh god. And then I've read my first supernatural magical threesome to beat up the bad guys, and I was like, fuck this shit, I'm out. You know what? I really like what she was doing in the first books, and actually topping my reading off, and the Blake really left big empty spot in my reading schedule, and I wanted to read something similar. So a friend who heard that there is this amazing Russian movie called Night Watch, or something I'm going to butcher in Russian so I won't bother, Noknoy Dozor, or if I take my fake Russian accent, Noknoy Dozor or something, I don't know. It was filmed in 2004 and was an urban fantasy movie that was inspired by the novel Night Watch, or more specifically the first third of this novel with very heavy editing. But I was blown away because this movie was very gritty, very out there, very realistic. It changed the way I saw fantasy and urban fantasy. It was not about power fantasy and wish fulfillment. It was something much different. When the book came out, I read it and I instantly got one of my favorite fantasy characters ever. The book was published in English in 2006. So there was some time between the movie and the book being translated, and there was supposed to be an American remake of the movie, but it never worked. There was a sequel, Daywatch, which was so-so. It was not as impressive as the first movie to me, and I had read the books by then. I was not impressed by what they did with the movies and how they changed stuff, because I was a huge fan of the books at that point. And Anton Gorodetsky, the main character in Night Watch and most of these books, is one of my favorite characters ever. He's a huge badass. What's the point in these books, in the Watch series? What makes it so special? The main concept is that there is this magic world, the Others, and they're beings who can manipulate Twilight. Twilight is sort of like when in Lord of the Rings Frodo put the ring on, it was mist and everything was slower and stuff. Yes, that's Twilight for these books, and it was never introduced in the movies because it looked very similar to Lord of the Rings, and the director said, screw that, I'm not ripping off Lord of the Rings, even though the author did that first. And there are two sides of the Twilight. There is the light and the dark, and they're sort of like good and evil, only not so much, because this is Russian fantasy, and if you've read any East European fantasy or sci-fi, you know that there is nothing to do with good and evil. It's just about soul-crushing cynicism. That's why I like it. So light is all about altruism, while dark has to do with being an individualist. So the light side is all about introducing social change, while the dark is all about getting profit. And that's how the light side reduced communism in Russia and Eastern Europe, and also the other ism from the mid-30s Germany. I know some of my viewers, of the few people who watch these videos, will be very triggered by this insinuation that both sides of the spectrum are the same. But that's not the argument the book makes. If you have ever met people who lived behind the Iron Curtain, and you hear their stories about how life was there, and if you read some history and see some of the stuff that happened in East European countries, then you'll see that somebody who lived under that regime has no fond memories of what happened there. You better don't read about the Spanish Civil War, for instance, but don't look up names like Hoxha or what's the Romanian guy? Ceausescu. No, don't look into European history. I remember I've met a girl who was born in 1977. She was some years older than me, and she was from East Germany, and she said, in my hometown everybody grew pigs, but we never ate pork. And that's pretty much how most of East Europeans feel about that era. I should also mention here that Russian culture tends to be much more heteronormative than what the West is at the moment. So yes, there are some strong women here and there, but it's mostly about men. So if you feel uncomfortable about this deconstruction of good and evil and some strong gender roles, maybe this series is not for you. Maybe you should tread with caution, because it represents another culture that's far different than what you and I have lived in. But again, reading in different culture means that you have to take some of the nasty stuff in too. Actually, the way that this side of the light is introduced is very interesting, because those two sides, light and dark, used to be in a war, but then they signed a truce and they're policing each other, and that's where the bureaucracy comes in. And there is the light has the Night Watch that follows the creature of the dark others, dark mages, witches, vampires, etc. And the dark side has the Day Watch, and they police the light so they don't do too much good, I guess, because there is this very weird Cold War spy thriller vibe throughout these books that I absolutely enjoyed. It's mages and vampires and werewolves doing a lot of clandestine shit. And in book 1 we meet Anton Gorodetsky, and he's a computer jockey. He used to be a computer programmer, but he was put in the field. He's a minor mage, he's nothing important. So he's hunting for some vampires, and of course he's friends with some vampires who are legal, and they're his neighbors. So that gives him a bit of a human side, and he's actually trapped in the machinations of the two watches, the two sides of the force. Each book is split into 3 stories that they link together, and Anton is one of my favorite characters. Of course, I love this guy because he is an ordinary dude who is trying to deal with machinations from some forces that are above him, and he is also exploring the realities of the Twilight as they are revealed to him as he gets more power and gets into a higher level with every book. Yes, there is this side of it, so it's a trope in fantasy, you know that. And actually the way the Twilight works, it's a great system because it's not that hard of a magical system, but it's very interesting. There are always new rules, new revelations, new mysteries to explore, and that's great. And Anton is a small fish in a big pond, and that makes it very sympathetic because he's doing small stuff and is running a case, and there's some huge changes coming out of it, and he has to deal with machinations, and his choices may make or break those plans, and that's a great idea. He's a good guy, he really wants to do good, and he's often finding himself being manipulated by his own side or having to deal with stuff, and he's using a lot of synchronicity in his magic, and he's seeing probabilities and examining them and tries to find answers this way, and that's very interesting. That's, well, it was of its era. It was of the 90s, this synchronicity, chaos, magic stuff. But he's not just blasting stuff or having huge rituals that reveal truths. No, he's on the street, on the beat, and listening to his magical instincts. That's very interesting. The light plays dirty, and the dark plays even dirtier. Twilight is sort of a sane force too. That's another interesting part of it, especially in the later books of the series. We get a lot of Twilight is doing stuff. Night Watch is all about Anton and his adventures in Moscow in the late 90s, trying to deal with both sides of the Twilight, both the watches and what they're doing. And then we get the second book, Day Watch, which is all about the dark side, and this means that it only features one story with Anton. And it's not my favorite book in there, it's not trilogy, as you can understand. It's my least favorite book and there is no trilogy. Yeah, after that, every other book is about Anton and his adventures. So, yay. And Day Watch is about the machinations from the dark side, the ripple effects from the first book and how they deal with it. The first story is actually quite good. It's a doomed love story about a light one and dark one who have lost their powers, and they fall in love together as they try to regain their force after a climatic battle in Moscow. The third book, Twilight Watch, really ups the ante. We get some very epic stuff here, and actually for me that's the high watermark of the series. And there's 3 books. If you like your urban fantasy a bit grimy and dark and not at all about magical threesomes and reverse harems, they're a must-read for me. These books are not action-a-thons, they're not fast-paced action thrillers, no, at all. They're very philosophical, very introspective, and they're a lot about the characters and their struggles and their beliefs. And that's something I really enjoyed about these books. And then after the movie came out and was very successful, Lukyanenko wrote another trilogy of books. They are these ones, and I won't go too much into them. I've read the final book this month, and I was not out, but I think that was the end of the Anton saga. It was a good ending, and if you're a fan, you'll appreciate how it ends and everything about it. I was not that fond of the trilogy, but of course, if you love the first books, you can do with some more Anton, but the stakes get much higher because Anton is more powerful in these books too. He's traveling around the world trying to solve some big crisis about the Twilight, which is sentient as it comes out during these books. There are still some very interesting ideas about these books, about the world building, and I can appreciate that the characters are good. Anton is growing, he's not that angry young man anymore, he's a player, but of course the books miss some of the element of small fish in a big pond. I mean, book 4, called The Last Watch, no, it's not The Last Watch, spoiler warning, even pokes fun at some of the inconsistencies between the movies, and a character that was a major character in the movies was just a minor player in these books, and he is reintroduced here with another role. And yeah, I mean, they're not bad books, they're fun books, they're good reads. And as far as I know, there are a ton of other Watch books without Anton from other writers right now, but they're not translated in English. I was looking at Goodreads and there were like 20 Watch books there. I was like, what's happening there? But it's a very popular series, and yeah, for me it's a must read if you're interested in what I've told you about. So if you read these books, I would love to hear your comments. I guess that they're not for everybody, but I love them, and I hope if you read them, you'll love them too. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you soon. Bye bye and have fun.